Non-Americans who have served with US soldiers, what is your opinion of them? Professional, very patriotic, strict hierarchy of authority with little room for initiative, very reliant on technology and gadgets, always come with massive support structures in the rear which are nice to trawl, best weapons and intel. They can come across as disdainful and condescending towards other armed forces, and tats everywhere. I know some Australian soldiers embarrassed the hell out of my unit at rugby. They probably like telling that story. They didn't realize how cold it can get in northern Finland. Israeli army here. Pretty positive opinion overall. Good gear, decent training. A bit too stuck on the formal side, but I can see why it's needed with their setup. Watching Marines jog through Haifa was funny. My grandma would come out with cookies and they were shocked. I guess it's one of the few places people don't fear and or hate them. From Canada. I served with guys who will never forget and still think fondly of 20+ years since. UK here. Served with US soldiers in Desert Storm, which is a much better term than what we called it, Op Granby. What I got from my experience was there's a lot of them. I mean like a lot. Where my task was to look after a range of kit. The US military had one soldier who was a specialist on each individual piece of kit. The hospitality we used to get when we were with the US soldiers was brilliant. They were really great fun to be around. So a shout out to 207 miles BDE. Great bunch of guys. Edit. Thank you kind redditor. Gold. Pure idiot gold. Katusa here. Met some of the most nicest, competent and morally upright characters from the US Army. Doesn't matter whether they were from the hood or trust fund babies. Black or white, they treated everyone even though they have no reason to be nice to with respect. Something in that army culture, I guess. Sure, there were some bad apples who burned down whorehouses and hide in the bushes by the ATM near the movie theater to savagely butt abuse unsuspecting enlisted men, but these guys are outliers. In any case, if I ever go to war, I'd feel at ease if I had a US Army guy by my side. Served with us troops in Korea. Lot of underwater ops and training. What I'll never forget is their mentality as soldiers. I absolutely loathed it. When I've asked other soldiers from overseas doing JME with us what they'd do if war broke out, most were very reserved about it, talking about the social and economical ramifications such violence would have and the blood, sweat and tears it would cost not only to the military but civilians as well. Whenever I asked the same questions to the US troops, their mindset of duck here. We'll beat the it out of anyone who ducks with us. We're the best. This was always first and foremost. Even the officers, when asked the same questions, wouldn't change from this singular disposition. It was just better nuanced. Worded better. Who would duck with us? When you pit our military firepower against the rest of the world's. Well, if you calculate, excluding this aspect, most serving were fantastic men and women. They are adept at driving big military vehicles in Europe. Ex-Royal Air Force aircrew. Always had a good time with the Americans I served with. A lot used to get confused by me being Scottish and the English Air Force, but on one detachment I met an American with the same clan surname as me and we ended up bezzering. That's what Brits call it when you are so drunk you and a mate are propping each other up while loudly trying to shout over each other that no, you're my best mate. Bloke ended up inviting me to his house a few nights later for a barbecue and then introduced me to everyone as a long lost relative. Balmy but brilliant. A friend of mine said they were good guys, but was surprised how open some of them spoke negatively about Obama's color. Edit. Made my point more clear. Haven't served, but dealt professionally with many current and former US soldiers in a previous job, and I was always impressed by how composed and polite they were. Even coming off their third flight in 48 hours and feeling like it. Bit stiff and overly formal, which stands out in Australia. But loosen up a bit over beers. Even the senior officers are respectful in a way that a lot of other military delegations I've dealt with aren't. Proud, but not arrogant. Edit. No idea why this post would get gilded, but thanks kind stranger. From Norway. They were a friendly lot. Canadian infantry here. I have been around Marines and Army infantry. First impression is that everyone was very friendly and all were a bunch of good dudes, all eager to have conversations and trade patches flags. So one-on-one they are great guys. We do feel sorry for how strict things are for the Americans. It's as if they are still in boot camp, always marching everywhere and getting jacked up all the time. Things are more relaxed in Canada. They have awesome kit and equipment. I'm envious. I think some of their skills are a little lacking compared to ours, but what do I know? Really, they're my favorite country to work with for sure. I was a British officer serving in Iraq. In my experience, American officers were of a lower caliber, less well educated, less gentlemanly, less aware of the world. I found the Americans robotic, lacking in nuance and empathy, and totally unfit for peace-building operations. They could fight and defeat an enemy with an overkill of technology and firepower, but couldn't talk to the Iraqis or understand Iraqi society. They couldn't build trust. So they won many tactical victories, but caused a strategic disaster. The effects of such are still being seen to this day. Of all the units I worked with in Iraq, the best, believe it or not, were the Italian Carabinieri. After all, they were formed to keep the peace in a lawless country overrun with brigands and bandits, and they have a century and a half of experience at doing just that. They knew how to work with the grain rather than against it. I worked with a US Army peacekeeping mission as a civilian contractor. This was in 2004 to 2006, so they were spread pretty thin. Other than the first deployment, they were mostly reserves. With that said, the impression that I got was that most of the ones I worked with were good guys, but about half of them seemed like they signed up for a weekend a month, 2 weeks a year to get free education, and were frustrated that they were where they were. There were only a couple that I met that were gung-ho about their next deployment being Iraq, but my main takeaway was that you've got a lot of very young, 21-22 years old, guys in charge of 4-8 soldier units, who may have very well never been out of their hometown, and here they are being sent halfway around the world, out on missions to interact with the local population, and they have no idea what they are doing. Very thin briefing of local customs, which doesn't leave a good impression with the people they come across. All in all, I have no idea how the US military is as successful as it is based on what I saw. Granted, most were Army reservists, so maybe regular active duty and other branches are more effective. Kind of reminds me of the chapter in War and Peace where Tolstoy writes how the success or failure of any particular battle has less to do with the genius of the leaders or braveness of the soldiers on either side, and more to do with luck or chaos theory. German here, served as in was drafted for 9 months and had a couple of days with US forces in Schweinfurt. We got sent to help out guarding the place when Operation Iraqi Freedom started. I had 2 nights teamed up with US guys. What stuck with me was how relaxed and upright careless compared to what I was used to the US guys were with weapons and ammunition. For perspective, we only got issued rifles and pistols for training. Guns were locked in a room when not needed. We did not get to take them into our quarters after hours, let alone keep them overnight. Mind you, we are not yet talking about ammunition. Even blanks are counted in and out, and you have to sign for every round you get. Of ammunition ist only issued in the range, and supervisors count every shot fired. One unaccounted round missing and the whole company gets to search it overnight. This made 20 years old me looking astonished when I saw American handle ammunition, a helmet full as a unit of measure. I've seen this thread a few times but never from the other side, so screw it, I'll give my opinion as an American. I've gotten to work with the Canadian, British, German, French, Israeli, Iraqi and Saudi military. The Canadians, British and German guys are pretty goddamn good at what they do. Personally though, I always found them too laid back, and not nearly as aggressive as I'd expect from warfighters. Their standard go-to action seemed to be wait here until someone tells us otherwise. The French I worked with were awful, late to everything, last ones in, first ones out, complaining about everything, and rude to boot. I was disappointed honestly, as I had been told they were great soldiers. Maybe it's just the one unit I met, but an impression lasts regardless. The Israelis though, holy it, those are some fierce methodicas through and through. Honestly, I think we could take a few pages from their doctrine. The Iraqis and Saudis are an insult to the word military though. Constant bickering, corruption, stupidity, laziness. Absolutely no military bearing whatsoever. I'm pretty sure the Saudis officers especially have no military training at all before they actually get put in charge of people. I don't know how it can be fixed. Honestly, Their culture is just not geared towards a combined arms military. Was a guard in one of their barracks during their last Iraq war and spent Christmas with one of them and his family. They seemed very fit, running every morning, very strong and very disciplined. And based on the percentage of black Americans in the US I had learned in school, too many of them were black. Especially after Christmas I had the feeling that many of them weren't really volunteers but forced into the military by birth into a lower class in their country without a real chance to get ahead in life except by military service. Little story, my English was horrendous at the time and one of them thought I wanted to report him for loud music during car check but I just wanted to know the name of the song and artist. By the time I understood that he gave me not the artist's name but his own. He already left and I could never apologize or clear up the mistake. I'm an aircraft technician in the RAF. Worked alongside the USAF on overseas exercises a few times. The biggest difference is their budget. Better facilities, better tooling, and about 5x the manpower per jet. Whereas we have specialist mechanical, avionic, and weapons technicians. They seem to have a specialist for every major aircraft component who would do nothing other than his very specific job role. Very friendly and welcoming lot for the most part. Eager to share stories and knowledge. They said they were pretty shocked at the amount of booze we'd put away every night and still be on time and functional the next day. All were extremely patriotic. Very military minded. A nationalistic pride that is increasingly rare in the UK. A worrying number were pretty racist. Which was strange seeing how multicultural their military is. My father deployed in Somalia with US soldiers. He was from the Pakistani Armed Forces. He said if Pakistanis were like Americans we'd have been to space and back again with aliens in tow. My ex served with quite a few, and all he said were they were arrogant with a god complex and lacked the skills to back it up. I worked in a NATO headquarters in Europe. I generally found US officers to be switched on and enthusiastic, but at the same time realistic as to who brought the impetus to the alliance, the US, while remaining receptive to smaller allies' inputs, at least on the face of it. I worked for an officer who was a little different. He was incredibly bright and hardworking, and a lot of people came to him for help. When he was under pressure and I would answer the phone for him he would ask me British, American and I answered neither. He would tell me in no uncertain terms to put the phone down. Both him and I are British. On duty, they are the most by the book, tight ass fellas around. Off duty, they do what young men do when in group. In general, being Americans. Canadian perspective. I was a part of a military exercise here in Canada in which we invited some Americans to participate. I won't name names for obvious reasons. The guys were a good bunch. About half of them had Ranger qualifications too. Loved to joke around and kept an all-around positive view when we weren't actually doing anything. I say that because when we had to work, they wouldn't stop complaining. I know our military isn't as highly funded as yours and we don't have machines to do everything for us, but come on. Are you in the army or what? One thing that I will concede is the fact that the administration for that exercise was not the best. We had delays and some problems come up and that's to be expected. We're talking about an army so it's not a surprise. Something that completely baffled me was how much reliant on technology they seemed. Part of our exercise involved navigating a whole platoon to an ambush location. Something that would have taken us 20-30 minutes ended up being 5 hours of trekking through thick bush. This is because we had to use a compass and a map. Now, the Americans volunteered to take the lead and for some unexplainable reason thought they can just use a map without the compass. I only found this out the next morning after being exhausted from carrying a C6 FN mag the whole time. At the end of the exercise some of them vowed to never take part in our exercises. What the duck? This is so far my only experience with the Americans. Hopefully future interactions turn out better. I did a very short, 3-night stint on USS Blue Ridge 20+ years ago. Every sailor and officer I met were damn nice guys. I found the ship itself to be lacking in some of the comforts we, Royal Australian Navy, had at the time. But the thing I remember the most was the food. It really was quite ordinary. Also seeing so many people say grace before eating. I never once saw that on an Aussie ship. From Argentina, Vietnam veteran. How resourceful, hard-working and responsible they were. When we first arrived in Vietnam, we were given a stretch of sand on which to set up our company area. I was amazed that in our group of 200 mostly 18-20-year-olds we had a representation of just about every skill we needed, from carpentry to plumbing. In a couple of weeks, we had walkways all around the company area, latrines, mess hall, showers and the ubiquitous piss tubes. It was my introduction to the can-do attitude of Americans. Looking for any negative responses so we know who to blow up next. They eat a lot, otherwise very nice. Quite a welcoming with great sense of humor type of guys. He's not served with them yet as he is only in training. My cousin is training for the Marines and sometimes is training with USA Marines in training. Apparently they don't get humor and are as subtle as a brick to the face. Go in guns blazing on every exercise, and are far too reliant on their technology and weapons. They also apparently take themselves very seriously. He doesn't enjoy training with them. I presume it's only as they are trainees and once they graduate they will have more smarts or in different situations. But in his experience so far he hopes when deployed he is never put with Americans as he doesn't feel safe with them. A bit disappointed. I work in Camp Command and Control and most of them don't give a flying duck about rules. And they stole our BBQ equipment. Swiss Army. Served in the Canadian Airborne Regiment in the 80s and we went to Fort Bragg to train with the US paratroopers. The general opinion then was, Canadians have the best informed troops, Americans are the best equipped troops and the Brits have the best NCOs. Before a big operation every Canadian soldier down to the lowliest private knew every step of the mission so that if things went badly, any one of them could finish the mission. The US troops had no idea what was going on unless they were NCOs or, occasionally, officers. They just climbed onto the aircraft and jumped when they were told. But man, their gear was modern and effective and expensive. Canadian troops were using radios from the Vietnam era and rifles from the 1950s. We had rain gear that wasn't waterproof but we had awesome rations that we could trade with our American counterparts for their rain gear and jungle boots. I was a conscript at a naval base in Singapore so while I didn't exactly serve with them, I got to meet my fair share of US Navy sailors. They were generally nice people and I was even gifted a patch of one of the carriers. Unfortunately there is only one bus line leading from the base back to civilization and whenever a large US ship comes, getting in and out of the base becomes a nightmare. My opinion as a US Marine training with other countries was they are in fact more relaxed on their procedures. I'm not saying that is a bad thing as it did not affect their efficiency. Also we are a bigger force that requires a stricter structure. Capital I trained with the Australian Army Artillery in Darwin and loved those guys. They are some of the funniest dudes. And after the month of training they took us out to party when we had liberty. They really made us feel at home which was nice on a 7-month deployment. I've also trained with the Royal Marines Artillery and they are efficient at what they do. I like that they actually showed interest when we cross-trained on equipment. They also are a fun crowd to go bar hopping with. The Japanese army was a little hard to train with due to the language barrier, but nonetheless they were very polite and involved when it came to training. Their infantry is very interesting to watch. The French I could take them or leave them. I've never trained with an allied military that I didn't like. When we train together people think Marines have this mindset of being better than everyone but that's not true at all. The one thing I found funny is we are all literally the same character wise. We love to drink, laugh, share stories, compete with each other etc. I'd go with those dudes to hell and back. When I worked at the London Olympics, the Royal Army assisted with security. One told me that the American bases in Iraq had McDonald's, whereas the British base had a cafeteria. Not sure if it is true, yet I found it funny. Grandpa was a translator in the Vietnam War. He thought the Americans were kinda dumb but were really fun to be around. My dad was UK Fleet Air Arm. His speciality was bad weather deck landings on fixed wing aircraft. Back in the day, the US, Canada and rest of the world were sending pilots to the UK to learn night and bad weather flying. And my dad was trainer. He said that by far that the pilots with the best natural ability were the Iraqi. They were chosen for intellect and motivation. He was also complimentary about Israeli pilots. He was not impressed with the Americans. They talked a good game but were overconfident and underskilled and complainy when put in demanding situations. Some senior Navy bods joined the course and saw this for themselves. Dad was then posted to the newly formed Navy Flying Academy in California and taught there for 5 years. He was very impressed with US airplanes and organization. Upvotes if you say US soldiers are great. Downvotes if you say US soldiers aren't that great. Till soldiers are all amazing people who definitely cannot do wrong. Sitting here waiting for my high and tight, reading these comments, and rocking the biggest patriotic boner right now. Not served, but the US does come to my hometown for training and randa. Honestly, the bad really duck up your day and leave a foul taste in your mouth. Hell, I feel bad for the bars that have no choice but to host them due to no one wanting to go in with a bunch of loud, rude Yanks who can't hold their booze. GF's dad worked with America's soldiers. Said they were lovely guys, but the military handed out medals like chocolate in comparison to others. Here's one for learning this, that, etc. Disclaimer, I am by no means a military man. I only have what he claimed. Maybe this is interesting. Remember to sort by controversial. Canadian here, was in Afghanistan in 2006 to 2007 and had a bunch of 10th Mountain guys with us for OP Medusa. Solid group of guys that were very professional and knew their it. American CAS was a godsend during that tour as well, save for a duck up with an A-10 strafing run that resulted in friendly fire. All in all 5/7 and would work with again. Korean and Canadian troops watched me get slayed by drill instructors on the parade deck of Paris Island. Rude loud mouths, but great people overall and some of the best soldiers I have ever met. Especially the guy that let me pilfer some neat stuff that we didn't have in exchange for some extreme cold weather gear that they didn't have. Canadian here. I served with US soldiers during training in Texas and on tour in Afghanistan. I love working with the US forces. They are genuinely friendly and very hospitable. We were on one of their ships for Canada Day and they made an awesome cake for the 2 Canadians on board. However, WTF with cheeseburger fries in the mess? Battered slices of hamburger and cheese. That stuff is a way more serious threat than ISIS. Loved the grits though. They are lucky soldiers in their entire life. I'm a former US Army guy that has a question. When I was in the army I knew a couple people who were Canadian serving in our military. If I learned they were Canadian and said something out loud like, "Oh, you're Canadian," they would very quickly shush me. Well, the most cursory of background checks would have shown you're Canadian. Yet the US Army apparently was okay with it. So why are you guys so worried? They are well trained, know what they are doing, and to be honest most of the US soldiers were some of the nicest of the bunch. They don't mind your broken English either. Although they do make a lot more pranks aimed towards the brass. What I found surprising was how ridiculously polite the US Marines are. Pretty much as if yes was the only acceptable answer. Not sure if that's down to a lower average age or ridiculous resources. Either way it was appreciated. I'd still take a mob of scruffy, dirty, swearing UK paras first though. I understand this is interesting. The ones at my work, Canada, are super nice and friendly. It is amusing to see the ones posted from the southern US deal with their first Canadian winter. They couldn't get over how well we could multitask, Aussie. They'd have one person specifically trained for certain tasks that we'd all be cross-trained in. Plus we'd often have non-coms working in roles that their officers would generally be assigned to.